Um,
Can I ask one question before we start?
okay.
I just want to ask, because if when two religious, two agnostic, two atheists, when they're coming together, bonded in love, or I'm wondering where is God in the midst of this?
All right. Okay. I don't know if you all heard that. If two atheists come together, where's God in the midst of this? How can God be there? I know this. Questions like this always come up because, as I tried to explain at the beginning, this first part of the principle is totally about ideals, and your life experience and my life experience isn't in accordance with it. So you see around you all the time people who, not people, me, my family, my friends, the reality I live in, which are not ideal. And then you wonder why study things which are so ideal, because they don't exist. So people are not all profoundly related to God, so what happens then? Of course, it's a very good question. Or, why do we need to know all this ideal stuff when life isn't ideal? Basically, it's because, and I tried to explain at the beginning, we need to know what is true in order to set our direction towards it, in order also to know what to uphold when other people are not upholding it. So how does your family become a better family? How does your workplace become a better workplace? How does your institution become a better institution? It's basically down to people. So the school isn't doing well. You bring in a new leadership team, a new headmaster and deputy or whatever it is, and they have a very strong experience of how to guide that community such that they can, lift up the whole situation. But how do they lift it up? When they come into the situation, they don't conduct themselves the way that everybody else is conducting themselves. They conduct themselves according to a higher standard. What's the essence of the higher standard? It's to do with motivation, or heart if you like, and it's to do with the standard of conduct, the principles that they conduct themselves by, which are the right form or expression through which love manifests itself. So, how do you behave towards each other? So, I give you an example. So I mentioned I worked for a while as a social worker, and I spent one period of time working in what was called a therapeutic community. It was a community for about 12 children, all under the age of 12, and they all came from backgrounds where they'd been sexually, emotionally and physically abused. And the level of disturbance in their lives was so extreme that you couldn't put them in an alternative family. Because if you put them in an alternative family, you'd exhaust and destroy that family very quickly because it didn't have enough resources to look after them. So you put them in an institution where you had shifts of staff who were quite trained, and you had a lot of professional input, so you could deal with this very strange behavior these children had. So I remember going to the place the first time, and there were such beautiful kids, looked so lovely. And I was just on a visit, before a placement there, and played with one little boy who had his coin collection, and it was really nice, and played with another little girl, and then I came to work there, and then you found out other things that you didn't see when you first went there, and very, very extreme behaviors. There's one little boy there who really needed two or more adults to hold him down, because when he went into a difficult situation, he could, use the chairs to smash the windows, and very, very, very difficult situation. And I remember I was just there for a couple of weeks, and this little boy, because of his disturbance, he threw a major tantrum. He was spitting and swearing and kicking. And the person who was the founder of this therapeutic community said to me, "Tim, please you take him now in the car to the playground." I was a little bit worried about this circumstance, and first of all I wasn't sure about, anyhow I got him in the car, and I was a little bit nervous about, can I drive this car with this boy screaming, spitting, swearing, kicking in the back of the car. Anyhow, we got to the playground, and eventually got him out of the car, and we went to the playground, and then over a period of time the situation calmed down, and I somehow succeeded in that task. But what are you fundamentally doing? What are you modeling to the children? Children who are behaving in disturbed ways, why are they behaving in disturbed ways? It's actually a disturbance which has been caused by the disturbed way that they've been treated. Do you understand? It's a result. And then they're behaving in patterns that they've become accustomed to, which are not the right patterns. So how are you going to recover the situation? It means you have to keep the right heart and the right conduct, regardless of the conduct that's shown to you. So, the conduct that's shown to you might find yourself with a 7 or 8 year girl who's sort of seducing you, very realistically, sexually seducing you. Why? Because that's how her life went. And of course she doesn't know what she's really doing, doesn't really know what it's really about, but it's a behavior. Or you find another boy who's shouting, kicking, screaming, spitting, swearing. So what do? How can you model? So what am I expressing? I'm expressing you have to know very clearly the right heart and be able to hold it consistently in the face of the behavior that's coming towards you. And then you have to hold the right pattern of conduct. Then what's the expectation? The expectation is inside there is something original. And if you model the right behavior, in the end you touch that something inside which should have met with the proper care from parents in early life, and then that begins to respond. And then the whole plan of this community, where we had shifts of people providing this care, was you recover the child's circumstance sufficiently that you can put them into a specialist foster placement, and they can actually, and the placement can hold and not get broken down by their behavior. You normalize the behavior. How do you normalize it? Because you keep the right heart and you keep the right code of conduct, and you don't spark off. Or you think about it in the workplace where everybody hates one another and everybody's undermining one another, and everybody's against one another. How do you recover it? How do you get out of that? It's endemic to the whole, to the whole institution. How do you put it right? You need someone to come who's got a right attitude and keeps the right conduct, and that person needs to find people to work with, to support them. And then this group creates an influence and it transforms the whole institution. It models the right behavior and creates a strong enough influence to change everybody else's behavior. So why do we need to know what's right or what's true? Not because it is what is, but because we need to hold to it if we're going to turn what's bad into better. So you said that to me, and you're a very rude person, and I'll say it back to you worse than you said it to me, and that'll make it better, won't it? It won't, but we do it all the time. We do it. You hurt me, I hurt you. And what does it mean? It means the hurt is expanded. You said wrong attitude. I don't have anything against you. You said to me, I never did anything to you. And you said it to me, so I do it to you. Then it's expanding. It's developing. Do you understand? Wrong heart, wrong conduct, developing. So you need to know what's right, because you need to hold to what's right, no matter what. And what the confidence is that there's not a design fault. The confidence God is true, the origin is true. You hold to that, and actually you are working with the design. It means actually that, they have this sort of phrase, one person or 2 people or 3 people along with God is a majority, no matter how many people are standing against. So if you keep the principles which are the true principles, then actually you start to work with the design of the universe, the heart that lies behind the universe. But that is very easy to say and very tough to do. So you need to know the principle very clearly. So when you find people in confusion with one another, they're all leaving their responsibility. They're all blaming each other. No one's thinking it's me. Everybody's blaming the other one. And there's no answers in there. Anyway, I'm going to get wildly out of time now. So I just want to explain a couple of other things. So this is a very profound point in Father Moon's teaching beyond the Divine Principle book itself. He explains how significant it is how men and women meet in love, how the sperm and the egg meet one another. It's the heart and the motive that lies behind it that's very important. So that means that he puts huge emphasis on this one. How do men and women meet in love? It must be a horizontal relationship, which is absolutely true to a vertical cause. So he even uses this expression. He says it's a 90-degree angle. It's like an analogy. Do you understand? It's not a 90. What it means is the love of God must be absolutely, truly substantiated, manifested in this relationship. So the relationship is caused by nothing other than the love of God. It's completely true to it. It's the effect coming only from that cause. That's how it should be. And then, of course, the love of God can pass. So he has a very high standard about how you prepare for this relationship between men and women, chastity before marriage, fidelity within marriage, fundamentally. And he even has some sort of catchphrases. One of his catchphrases is, your sexual nature, your sexual organ, fundamentally, to be most graphic, doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your partner. It belongs to your wife, or it belongs to your husband. It doesn't belong to you. It's not for yourself. So you can't behave as you would wish for yourself, self-centeredly. It's for the sake of the other one. Of course, it's ultimately for the sake of God. It's for the sake of your children. It's part of the three objects' purpose. Do you understand? How do you use what you have so you're loving God, so you're loving the other person, so you're loving your children? This is a very high standard of responsibility, right? It's a very high standard of responsibility. So he says out of that, it's a very interesting point. He talks about love, life, and lineage. Which do you think has most value? Many people think that it is love. However, no matter how valuable love and life are, they are horizontal in nature. What does that mean? It means they appear and they conclude within one generation. On the other hand, lineage is vertical in nature and continues forever, generation after generation. So he's talking about what's the most precious thing in the whole wide world. It's a tradition of love which passes through the generations. That's the most precious thing. You need something that passes. Once you find the love that passes, you cracked it. That's it. It passes from God through this meeting place between man and to the next generation. Then it becomes grandparents, parents, and children. And it goes through the generations. So you see it. You see it when you're working with people. You know your friends at school, and you can see the people who've benefited from a good family tradition, and the people who are at the mercy of a difficult one. But then how do you solve that? Okay, this is the final solution, is you just kill all the people who are badly behaved, and then you've got only the good ones left. Because that's not principled. Do you understand? That's not coming from a motivation of love or something like that. It doesn't work. You become brutalized by that. That's not the attitude of God. So that one doesn't work. Anyhow, that you can catch the point, I think. So he's very, very into love that passes, love that has an existence which beyond one generation to the next generation to the next generation. Fundamentally 3 generations, and it's come into existence. It has fully formed itself, and it has the power to continue. And again, he very deeply expresses why do we marry? This is a very sort of interesting type of why do we marry? This is somehow, why do you marry from the point of view of understanding the heart of God and the purpose of God making men and women? You marry to resemble God more fully. Why? Because God is not just masculine or just feminine. God is the absolute harmonization of masculine and femininity. So what's the most complete expression of God's masculinity? It's man. What's the most complete expression of God's femininity? It's woman. So when man and woman come together, completely harmonized in love, this is a more complete expression of God than a man can ever be by himself or a woman can ever be. So it's to become whole, because we're only half. And this is an extraordinary idea. It's because when you come together in love, you complete God. What a strange idea is that? Of course, God is complete. God's self-existent. God's absolute. But no, in another sense, because God is relational, it means God is looking to complete himself through a relationship. Of course, God is within his own being self-existent, but God's nature is to give love, and therefore he's seeking a relationship. So when actually God gets a partner, God completes himself more fully in this expression of himself through his creation. So, and Reverend Moon talks a lot about this. He expresses God wanted to dwell in man, and he uses first man, Adam, he uses this expression. God wanted to live inside Adam, who's in the masculine expression, and through Adam, God wanted to sow the seed of love in Eve. He expresses like that. Now, of course, also God is feminine, right, as well. So don't misunderstand that point. Actually, Father Munoz has a very nice way of balancing the value of the sexes. He says, on one level, he says God wants to come into Adam and sow the seed in Eve. So he says man is subject because man sows the seed. The egg receives the seed. But on another level, he said, what's the most beautiful creation of God? Yeah, it's clear. It's the final creation. Final creation, woman. So who's the partner of love of God? That's why he expresses it like that. Of course, God is masculine and feminine, but he expresses it like that because who is woman? In a sense, woman is the bride of God. And how will God meet his bride? Through man. Please take this, it's a very profound angle to understand. Of course, God is the creator and we're the creation. There are many avenues to look at it. But what Father Moon's trying to express is, what is the heart of God? How precious is it that man is made by God for woman and woman is made by God for man? How precious is it? And how much is God supposed to be manifested through it? This is unbelievably challenging. Why is it unbelievably challenging? Because in the beginning of human history, it wasn't done correctly. And consequently, we're living as a result of a tradition which didn't embody the correct standard. And once the standard's gone wrong, recovering it is difficult. Once the wrong pattern's established, tendency is for it to expand. But God is always looking for reversing the wrong pattern and establishing the correct pattern. So when we look at the history of restoration, we'll find God's trying to do that. He's trying to block the wrong pattern of development and find a base another place, establish that base and establish the right motivation and pattern of development, and then use that to influence the wrong one which has already existed and turn it into right and make everything right. So that's why we need to know what the right motivation, the right pattern is, so that God can find another base and use that one to recover the wrong, to transform the wrong pattern. So, and also, why do we marry? We marry to become more complete, resemble God more fully, in a sense to complete God's creation, because God needs a partner of love to which he can taste all those beautiful things in his own being. And because then through that we establish the tradition of love, life, and lineage, through which God's heart and love multiply, endlessly in incredible variety of love down through human history. That's what we express was God's original intention. So the third blessing is to do with the relationship between people and things.
I'm sorry. Did you say that God is male and female?
Yeah.
He's just not just male. But
God is male and female. We explained that very clearly because you see it in all the creation. But we also explained, in a sense, God is like the mind and the creation is like the body. In another sense, because masculinity and femininity express this in a way, God is like the masculine subject and the creation is like the feminine object. Do you see, they're all different angles. So please don't think of just one, because the truth is a mix of all of them. And I don't mean it's confusing. I just mean these are angles through which you can catch the heart of God more. So God is masculine and feminine, but in a sense, if you tried to characterize the love that God has for his creation, you could characterize it as a parent to a child, you could characterize it as a mind to a body, but also in a sense you could characterize it as a man for a woman. So in the poetry of religion, you find those types of expressions. Very interesting. Anyhow, so this is the final one. So in a sense then, to put it into that context, human beings should love things like a man should love a woman. Or like a mind should take care of the body. Or, like a parent should look after children. It should be like that. And then God should be at the center of the relationship. The way God envisaged it to be should become the way it is. People should treat and care for things as precious gifts from God, which they would never mistreat. And they would use them for good purposes. And that will make that four-position foundation. So I'm going to stop there, even though there are some more slides. And going to go to the next one. Right. So this is the final presentation on the principles of creation. And it's all about how things develop. So it's built more upon that one about the three, the origin, division, union, action, this process of development. And of course that's rooted in the understanding of how from the origin, two divided beings, give and take action, they unite, and that then realizes substantially the vision or the intention or the heart of God. So one thing's for sure, nothing appears fully formed. Everything grows and develops through stages, and the growing takes time in this created world. And development isn't just aimless or with directionless. Actually, development has a direction. There's a purposeful element. Where's this purpose element carried by? It's carried by the universal prime energy itself, in a sense. That's why in the natural world, and we're going to examine this particularly, where things basically follow the direction which exists within the energy of the creation and the principles which exist within the very nature of the creation, where they follow that, everything just behaves according to that principle. But in human life it's different. Why? Because we have freedom and responsibility. We are not just automatically doing it. Of course, some things happen automatically. If I cut my hand, then it heals. The physical things, they happen as they should. Sometimes you have to put a bit of care in and so on, but fundamentally they happen like that. But in terms of spiritual development, it's to do with my responsibility. So that's exactly the area we're going to examine. So things grow. The principle said if you're trying to be the most, if you're trying to cover everything, you're trying to make the most universal pattern of growth, the most universal pattern is that things grow through three stages. In a sense, you can say there's a beginning, a time of beginning or formation, a time of development, and a time leading towards completion. So we call them the formation stage, the growth stage, and the completion stage. So the seed germinates and sprouts. It grows. There's a period where it fundamentally grows towards becoming, the flower, the plant, the tree, whatever. And then finally at the completion stage, it grows to its maturity and it can actually bear fruit and it can reproduce itself. So this type of pattern in terms of the development of all the things in the universe, not just trees and plants and flowers, but everything, is through stages over time. Basically a starting point. The principle's view is behind the starting point. The starting point is not an accident. It's planned, purposed and created out of an intention of heart and love. So it's not an accident. It's envisaged in the mind of the Creator before it comes into being. That's the principle's perspective. And so that's the process of growth and development. And it connects to origin, division and union. So this is origin, this is division, this is union. Stages, as it were. They're all stages. So in other words, no one of them happens, in an instant. Of course, different life forms may have different periods of existence. Some things that come to life, they have a very short life. Other things have a very long life. Elephants have a long life, dragonflies have a short life. But within that, these stages of development are there. So, and it relates also to a scriptural source of evidence in a sense, because in the Bible it has this very strange expression. When it talks about the days of creation, it expresses in the Bible, there was evening and morning the first day. And the principle says, what's this talking about? Between evening and morning is the night. What is the night? It's the time of growth. So evening is the time of the conception of the idea originally in the heart and mind of God. Night is the period of development, as it were, the coming into initial creation, the period of development. Morning is when the coming to maturity and perfection of the things that were created. If you look at other scriptures, the Adi Granth, the Sikh scripture, 3 are the stages of one's life: a child, young and old, but all the 3 are vain, says Nanak, if one dwells not on God. So in other words, it should be rooted in, God's heart and God's purpose. So a man who seeks enlightenment cannot expect to remove worldly desires today, attachments and evil desires tomorrow, and to get enlightened the day after. So in other words, in the process of spiritual growth and development, this also includes the element of correcting oneself or correcting things. It doesn't happen 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, finished. It's not such a process. It's a development over time. It requires a lot of investment, a lot of time to bring about those results. So, another image this time in terms of the development of the human body going through 3 stages. What the principle explains is this period of development from the starting point, the origin, to maturity. This period is governed by what it calls there the force of the principle. And it says that that force has a certain autonomy. It has a certain energy and drive and purpose within itself which governs itself. It's an autonomous process. In other words, it's basically automatic. When it comes to the development of things in nature, in the universe, the processes that are going on are a manifestation of principles which are not contravened. They're followed, they're kept to in the way that nature develops. So the force of the principle is basically automatic in the development of things, but and it leads things to what is termed perfection. But what does perfection mean? It means maturity. It means the time at which things come to be completed, where their full potential is achieved, where their purpose is achieved. But whilst in things that's basically an automatic process, in human development, and I'm talking particularly about the development of the human spirit, the internal character of the human being, not the external form, there is another element which is not present in the rest of the things of nature, and that is the element of human responsibility. So yes, the principle operates and guides us, but you need to add to it your own responsibility. So we're going to examine how does that happen? And why is that so? Why did God make it so? Why is it not automatic in our case? So here's some scriptural quotation. God changes not what is in people until they change what is in themselves. So this is a Quranic scripture explaining that actually God can't change you, you have to change yourself fundamentally. Human growth in the indirect dominion. What do we mean by the indirect dominion? It'll become more clear when we talk about what we mean by the direct dominion. Basically, the indirect dominion is the period of growth. And during this period of growth, in terms of human development, there's God's part of responsibility and there's the human part of responsibility. So this is talking about God's responsibility, this is talking about human responsibility. So in terms of man's spiritual development, it says that God's responsibility is to make us aware of the principles or the moral laws and to give us everything we need so that if we exercise our own responsibility, basically to receive those laws or rules of life and we follow them and we invest our wholehearted effort, follow and exist our wholehearted effort, we will add our portion of responsibility to God's portion of responsibility and we'll grow to become a mature person. A person who can directly relate with God, if you like. So this track or pathway towards God is not directly governed by God, it's indirectly governed by God through the laws and principles. Where are these laws and principles expressed? Well, they're expressed, all the great faith traditions express a set of laws, a set of rules. And as a parent towards your child, you have to express a code of conduct. You explain to them about a code of conduct that's consistent with principled behavior or right behavior. Why do you explain that to them? Because you want them to behave correctly so they can grow into a good person. But before they've practiced it, they don't know how important that is. And they don't necessarily, they will not, in their own heart, fully recognize those truths because they're immature. So, when you're the... well, I'm not, so I won't talk. I was going to talk about the world's greatest pianist. But anyhow, I drive a car, right? So when you learn to drive a car, what happens when you're learning to drive the car? Especially it's got a gearbox, right? It goes, and stops. And when you're on the hill start, you're trying to get the clutch right, and just the engine goes, because every time you're stalling the car. But once you know how to drive a car, you don't even think anymore. I remember I was 17 years old and I just passed my driving test and I got a job in a garage washing cars. And I had to move all these cars around the car park and I'd only ever driven one car, two cars actually, my dad's car and the driving instructor's car. And I knew how to work those two, but all these other ones, they had gears on the column and all sorts of funny things. I was scared out of my mind that they were all closely parked together. I would move one of these cars and it would smash into another one. I was full of anxiety every day. How am I going to move these cars? So I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to ask anyone. It was very difficult. So the point is, when you know how to drive, it becomes your second nature. You don't even have to think, right? So the point about the right living, when through right living, you've developed a right heart and a right attitude, and it's substantiated in yourself, you don't have to consult a rule book. You don't have to seek someone else's advice. You don't have to wonder too much what to do, because your heart tells you what to do. Because the principles that you've observed have made you into who you are. Can you understand? By keeping a certain code of conduct, you make yourself into a certain type of person. Where do you get the code of conduct from? You get it from a good person, right? Or originally, in a sense, from God. Through the scripture, through the imam, through the priest, through the religious founder, and then you learn. And so when you read that scripture which Muhammad said, you thought it meant something, but then you read the hadith and you find out when he practiced it, it was completely different from what you thought it should be. Something like this type of idea. So we call this the indirect dominion. It means God doesn't govern you directly, he governs you through the laws. This is what happens from parents to children. This is what happens from the expert, the great pianist to the student. You have to learn your scales first. You have to learn how to finger the keyboard. You have to learn all this stuff you don't want to learn, because you'd like just to be a brilliant pianist in a second. But you can't do it. You have to practice all the disciplines first. As you know, Mother Teresa, she led a very ill-disciplined life. She would go out partying till 3 a.m, and she'd get up at 1 o'clock, after lunch, and then she would just, have a big feast of a meal, and then she would go out and party again. No, she never did any of that. No. Unbelievably personally disciplined. Similarly, you look at Gandhi, or you look at, all these people. They're unbelievably personally disciplined. Because through that, they learned, they came to embody love. They came to embody right conduct. So this is another statement here. It's a very interesting statement. God is perfect. It can only fully relate to perfect beings. That's mature and completed beings. All beings grow to reach perfection or maturity. During this time of indirect dominion, God relates indirectly through the principle. So you can explain to your children what love would require of them, but they will never really know what it is until they reach that level of maturity themselves. You can describe it, you can explain it, you can implore them to keep it, but they won't know why or how until they reach to a similar circumstance. So, parents graduate to be grandparents, and their children become parents, and then they start to comprehend something that they didn't comprehend before. So spiritual growth, well, we think of all sorts of qualities that indicate that we're spiritually growing. You develop an awareness for others, not just for yourself, and for others' needs. So, I was working in a family centre where we'd invite parents to come in with their children, they'd eat lunch with us, and we'd be watching them, because we needed to make a judgment or give a report which was recommending to the authorities whether the children should stay with the parents or not, whether they should be removed from the family. So you're looking at how aware are the parents of the children's needs. Some parents have no awareness for their children's needs, they're only aware of their own needs and their own expectations, which may be completely unrealistic towards little children. And then you realize those children's lives are in a lot of danger. So anyhow, when you develop your maturity, you're aware of others, you're aware of their needs, you develop your own sense for what's right and wrong in your heart, not just a code of conduct, and you gain maturity to give and receive love, and growth of sensitivity to God. So, of course, when you think about the share of the portion of responsibility, because we said there's God's responsibility and there's human responsibility, God's responsibility is huge. I mean, God envisaged the whole thing and set up the whole thing. So God has done basically everything. But the last bit God cannot do. The last bit in God's creation is the fulfillment of human responsibility. Because without his special partner, God does not even have a substantial way to relate to the rest of the creation. except through human beings. So although what we do is tiny and insignificant compared with what God has done, still, without it, God's creation is not complete. A very practical example of this is parents and children again. So parents can provide huge amount of support, or if you like, the tradition of the nation or the tradition of the religion provides centuries of economic development, centuries of spiritual wisdom, and that all's coming to an individual person's life. But whether or not they benefit from that and follow that or not, that is not, even though that all that tradition that's been established, all that wisdom that's been accrued, all that benefit that's there is coming to them, whether they make it into something or not will depend on their portion of responsibility. If they don't, all that inheritance could become nothing, could be undermined. So although it's small in comparison, it determines whether the inheritance bears fruit or not. Do you catch the point? So, that's the situation of parents, isn't it? You invest so much, but then, you can't be sure of the outcome. When you don't know what's going to happen. So, of course, when when my son left home a little bit, one of my sons, he left home a little bit early because of a certain circumstance and lived with his sister. And he was 16, and what do? You can't watch him all the time anymore. So you're not sure what's he going to do. So, of course, you buy a lot of CCTV cameras and you put them up in the bedroom and in the bus on the way to school and down all the streets, and you follow him in your monitor at home, his every move, And you also employ a couple of private detectives to follow him everywhere. So if anything goes wrong, they get on the phone to you straight away, and you maybe hack his phone also, so that... No, you can't do any of that stuff. Because if you do, you're violating his portion of responsibility. It means he wants nothing to do with you. You have to demonstrate trust, but you're hoping and praying, right, that, he'll do the right stuff, he's not mature, but if he doesn't have the opportunities, how is he going to become mature? How is he going to make all the right decisions? So this is a very, think about it today. People are the current manifestation of centuries of religious tradition. And in the best examples of it, there are some things that got very messed up over history, but the best examples of it, but actually they can't ensure what their children become. So this is the point. This is the portion of human responsibility. But why did God design it so? Why didn't God make it so our children do what we say? Why doesn't he make it that you just, you get the chip at birth and you stick it in there and it's all, it's guaranteed. The outcome's guaranteed. Correct behavior is guaranteed. Wouldn't that be much more satisfying? No, it wouldn't be satisfying because actually we're beings of love, so we want a response of love. We don't want pre-programmed responses, we want a response of love. And then that's when we feel satisfied, that's when we feel rewarded. Yes, of course, darling, I love you. Anyhow. So, along with God's portion of responsibility, or divine grace, if you like, we need to add to it the human portion of responsibility. And then, if you add the two together, then what comes out is what God intended. So, these are just scriptural quotations where it shows that we have a portion of responsibility. So, if you have faith, God has a way to help to cure you. If you have the prayer of faith and you make a group of people and you pray for a sick person, it can help them. God can't help them without that base of human effort. And if you knock, then the door can be answered. If you ask, you can receive. So it's emphasizing we do have a portion of responsibility. We do need to exercise it. What that also implies, of course, is that we have freedom. It means that we can decide to do as God would have us do, or what's in accordance with heart and love, or we can decide to do something else. But when we talk about real freedom, it has a slightly different meaning. Anyhow, here's a biblical quotation from the Old Testament to Jewish people. Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, and the curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God. So in other words, if you disregard the principles, you will get the consequences, and it will not be good. And the Creator can't avoid that because He's set things up according to a certain principle. So, of course, God will seek to guide you so that you're not in danger, but in the end, we have our portion of responsibility. So why did God give us a portion of responsibility? Fulfillment of responsibility brings joy to God because then God sees us mature. Or, as I said, what's the most wonderful thing? If you see your older child taking care of your younger child, it is extremely beautiful to children, to parents rather. What's most beautiful to children is to see their parents loving each other. This type of content. Okay. So God gave us responsibility so that through the fulfillment of it, we could manifest the nature of God. And we could participate in the creation of myself, or become what it says there, a co-creator. And then by becoming a co-creator, we could qualify ourselves to have the right of dominion over the things of creation. So the principle says human beings are different from everything else because everything else is completed through automatically following the principle. But we complete ourselves, so we are different from everything else. In a sense, we're qualifying ourselves to be able to govern over things in place of God. So what does this mean? It means these three responsibilities. The responsibility to bring my mind and body together, the dual characteristics of internal character and external form. The responsibility to put masculine and feminine together. This is to do with family and love and men and women. The responsibility to bring human beings and the creation together in the same relationship between my attitude to the natural world and God's attitude as the creator, in place of God. Why did God give people free will? Because, God is the source of love. He created love to be the center of human life. Love has to be freely given and received. So love is more than law. Law is the pathway to love. The result we're seeking is love. We don't want to be governed by law. Ultimately, through following the law or through following the principle, we want to become people of love. So law is just a guideline that parents give to children, that God gives to human beings. If they follow it, they become a person of love. That's the goal, because God is in search of relationships of love. So ultimately, God wants human beings to go through those three stages of development and enter a position where they can directly relate with God, because they've matured their heart, so they have a heart that resembles the heart of God. And so that heart governs them and guides them to behave according to the principle. So direct dominion, the state of direct dominion is where there's a oneness of love between God and man. God is like the mind, man is like the body. Human beings, men and women, of course, that should really say mankind or something, probably, or humankind. God and man or woman, in that sense, become one in love, in resemblance. So God is love and he abides in love, and those who abide in God and God abides in him. So it's talking about, God dwelling in us in that sense. This is from the New Testament. So a perfect person is the substantial object to God and one with God. He feels how God feels and he thinks how God thinks. God dwells in that person just as a mind dwells in a body. A perfect person is therefore qualified to be a true owner. That means he's qualified to treat things and have possessions and responsibilities in life and conduct himself as God would conduct himself, in place of God. God has dominion over the creation through such human beings. So moving to another very, very important point, it's about the spiritual world. It's about, what is the journey of life? Is the journey of life completed with when we physically die? Or is there something that goes beyond that? And is there a purpose that's beyond that? Well, in a sense, the principle is very clear about it. It's saying God is a God of internal character and external form. So when God creates, he creates everything with an internal character or nature and an external form. And that's the pattern of everything in creation. That's why human beings have a mind or spiritual intangible aspect and a tangible visible body aspect. But this is true not only for everything in the creation, it's also true in terms of the environment in which my material physical being exists, which of course is the physical world. But just as, to the physical world, there must be a internal character counterpart. This is the external form aspect. This is the internal character aspect. That is the spiritual world. So the principle explains the physical world is to the spiritual world like the body is to the mind. So the shape of my mind is expressed in the shape of my features. So the best view of my mind, which is invisible, is my body. So most people don't have a direct awareness of the spiritual world. So how can you know what the spiritual world's like? The best representation of it is the physical world. But of course the physical world is a limited world in time and space. But if you want to know what the spiritual world is without seeing it, you would look at the physical world. Just as you would look at someone's body and their conduct and behavior in order to understand their invisible mind. But this is the world of cause, and this is the world of effect. Or this world is a shadow of that world. So this is not unreal, this is the world of cause. This is as real, or in a sense, this is more, this is the world of cause, this is the world of effect. So it's a very interesting type of view, and it has huge implications. So of course that world, the spiritual world, is infinite, eternal, and transcends time and space. That's very interesting because when we describe God in similar terms: eternal, self-existing, absolute. So if God is going to create a partner, right, of love, and God has an eternal nature himself, the principle's answer to that is God needs an eternal partner. God needs an eternal partner. And also the principle has a very interesting explanation about the loves we develop in our life, because the suggestion is that that death is not the end of love, because it's not the end of human existence. And human life is but a short space of time in a sense. But life after physical life is eternal life in comparison. It's not finite. It's not temporary. It's not limited by time and space. It transcends time and space. Again, scriptural testimony: no one can bring to an end the spirit which is everlasting. The eternal man cannot die. He does not die when the body dies. And Ecclesiastes: and the dust, the physical body, returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Quran: behold, you prefer the life of this world, but that hereafter, the spiritual world, is better and more enduring. So we have a physical self. We referred to it before as the body, right? But actually we're going to make a little bit more distinction now. The body is composed of two aspects. Interesting, because there's a pair system everywhere. There's a more internal aspect, which is the physical mind, and a more external aspect, which is the physical body. So you have a physical mind. It's like an animal's instinctive mind directs your physical body. But of course we don't just have, and our physical nature relates, through our five physical senses to the physical dimension in which our physical body exists. And we relate to it and receive nourishment from it and air and all the other things we need to survive and exist. Similarly, though, we have a spiritual aspect to our nature, and our spiritual nature also has a spiritual mind and a spiritual body. In other words, in the spiritual world, people are not a puff of smoke or a disembodied being. They actually have a form in the spiritual world. What is this form? The best way we could relate to it is it's like the physical form. And you can read about people who have experiences in the spiritual world. Anyhow, with our spiritual body, we relate to the spiritual world, which is the dimension in which our spirit exists. So of course we exist in both worlds during our physical lifetime, but actually we are most people have very little awareness of the spiritual. Compared with the physical. We're very aware of the physical, not so aware of the... So we have a spirit mind and a spirit body. So what is the human mind? The human mind is formed through the interaction between the spirit mind and the physical mind. So the spirit mind is the mind which relates to God, truths, higher beliefs, higher understandings. It's the one in which your conscience and your heart are placed. And then this directs the physical mind, which in turn directs the physical body. And when they, in daily life, when, as it were, your mind and body are interacting through the interface between your spiritual mind and your physical mind, this interaction develops your mind. Just as you develop as a person through the interaction between your mind and your body, which generates energy, so your mind develops through this interaction between the interface between the spirit mind and the physical mind. And this interface should be centered on God's love and God's purpose, and representing the coming together of internal character and external form in unity, centering on the higher purpose, centering on the heart. And then you develop this mind, center of which is heart, and through the practice of correct principles, through the interface between your spiritual mind and physical mind, you become a person with a true mind. However, of course, the reality is that we have different levels of conscience or consciousness in a sense, and these are often determined because in different traditions, in different cultures and so on, the view of truth is different. So somebody may feel profoundly disturbed if they find that by mistake they ate beef. Someone else would be profoundly disturbed if they find by mistake they ate pork. Someone would be profoundly disturbed if they ate any meat. So, because they have a different concept, different concept behind. And then this is governing their conduct. So, but everybody has the voice of conscience within themselves. And the more elevated this voice of conscience is, it would depend on the way in which they understand and practice their spiritual understanding. Where's that sort of information coming from? It's coming from your scriptures, it's coming from religious traditions, it's coming from the religious founders, it's coming from your parents, it's coming from all those sorts of sources. Okay. Of course, there's lots of ways in which you can observe spiritual phenomena: extrasensory perception, telepathy, clairvoyance, psychic healing, mediums, channeling. As a religious movement, Father Moon's not into all of these things fundamentally. Getting interested and captured in all these types of views. Fundamentally, the things that we need to do is we need to know the right heart, the right attitude, and conduct ourselves according to the right principles. But these things are evidence of an existence beyond the physical plane. So our body relates, our physical aspect, which is our physical mind and physical body, relates to the physical world. Our spiritual aspect relates to the spiritual world. So, example of the physical world, dog. Not a worm, but a dog. Example of the spiritual world, angel. Now that's an interesting thought, but if you look in all the great scriptures and traditions, you'll find reference to spiritual beings. What is the position of man in that world? Man is in a very special position because of all the things created. It's only the human being that exists in the physical world and in the spiritual world. You see the spiritual world, that's a picture of the spiritual world, everybody. It closely resembles the physical. This is a bit of a joke, but it's more colourful. Anyhow, it's just it's a symbol of it. But man's position is very particular because man exists in both worlds. So in a sense, he's a mediator between the two worlds. But also, his physical body, his physical being is like a miniature physical universe. It contains all the elements of the physical universe. His spiritual nature is a microcosm of the spiritual world. And then man's destiny is to elevate his own spiritual being, to fulfill his own portion of responsibility, to be able to represent God and govern over both worlds, to be the ruler over both worlds. So I just want to finish with this one. This is the last thing now. The relationship between the body and the spirit. This is really, really important to capture because, of course, we know we need to take care of our physical bodies. So people are doing a lot to take care of their physical bodies, especially in our rich, educated, medically aware world. So they're doing exercise, they're trying to make sure they get, good supply of clean water and good oxygen and so on and so on and so on. Most fundamentally for our physical development, we need to make sure we've got air, of course, and we need to make sure we've got sunlight, which brings many different benefits. Amongst them, for example, warmth, but other vitamins and other nourishment comes through that. So this is very, this is very essential. If you remove air or you take away warmth, for example, we die very quickly. If you take away food and water, you will also die ultimately, but it takes a lot longer. So we say these are the positive elements, these are the negative elements. So we know we need these things to survive and develop physically. But actually our spiritual development is even more significant. So, but what do we need to nourish our spirit? The principle explains we need two sets of elements. The first one is we need some spiritual food. We call it life elements. What is life elements? It's the love and truth of God. How does the love of truth and God get to you? People have direct experiences with God, but also people have direct experiences through parental love, through the love of elders, through the wisdom of the founder of the religion, the level of love that's manifested in, through the scripture, all these different ways. But we need that. That's why in order to grow spiritually, you need to regularly receive that sort of nourishment. So you look at the life of all people who spiritually developed very much, they have a personal discipline. It's to do with, meditation, prayer, retreat, scriptural reading, personal daily discipline. You don't have it, you can't grow. You need to get it from somewhere. But you need to add something else to it, and that something else you need to add to it, that is actually what we call vitality elements. Where does that come from? It actually comes from your own good actions. So if you don't transfer the love and the truth from yourself, from your spirit to your body, and do good deeds with your body, you can't get the negative element which you add to the positive element for your own growth and development. Of course, this is to do with human responsibility. The life elements, that's coming from God or your parents or the sacred scripture or whatever it is, that's not yours. But the vitality elements, that's your one, right? And if you don't add it, you don't go anywhere. You can't develop or grow. So you can study scripture all day long, but if you don't bring it into your life and manifest it, you will not grow. That's the point. Actually, I better do just one more, if that's the end of that one. And then there's an interaction takes place between your spirit and your body. You pass from your, quotes there. That's also, I just want to do one last one here. This is this one, right? So, this is the journey of life. It's very important to capture. So the purpose of the 9 months we spend inside the womb is basically to prepare the physical body of the child to be born and come out of the womb and to be able to survive physically, live healthily in the physical world. So this period, when it comes to an end, you discard the placenta, you discard the environment, you leave the environment and discard the protective, sac in which you grew, because you don't need it anymore. Because your body should have developed. So if the child is born prematurely, it's problematic because maybe the lungs didn't develop. Maybe the baby didn't develop completely. But if everything completes itself properly, the baby is born into this next stage of life. What's the purpose of this stage of life? Of course, we have a physical body. Our physical body grows up until we're 18, 19, 20 or whatever to maturity. But ultimately, what's the purpose of this stage? Just as you leave your placenta behind here, actually in the end you leave your physical body behind. What's the purpose of your physical body? It's you have something through which you can express your love, and through which you can express your heart, and you can express and practice your principles. If you didn't have it, you couldn't get vitality elements. So that's why we need a body. So what's the purpose of the body? The body's to be used to practice love, to manifest, substantiate love. And then you will get from your good actions, you will get your own growth and development. That's your portion of responsibility. And then what are you preparing yourself? Because one day your body will die, not a problem, you leave it behind. If it's fulfilled its purpose. And just as you leave the placenta behind, you leave the physical body behind because you graduate to the next stage of life. So that's very important. If that's true, that means you define the purpose of life. So it's not bad to try and look like you're 30 when you're 50. It's okay, it's fine. It's not bad at all, but it's not the main purpose, if you see what I mean. The main purpose is not to preserve the physical. However hard you try, one day it's gonna go, The point is, how do you grow your heart, and how do you grow your love, and how do you grow your spirit? Okay, I'm sorry, I've overrun a bit. Apologies. Am I right? Oh, I didn't overrun. Oh, amazing. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, really? Okay. Oh, well, I've got a lot more to say then. No, I just finished with this one. I think this is the last one. So this is very interesting. Statement from Father. The spirit world does actually exist. It is not a world that has been fantasized or imagined into existence. We do not have the right to choose. It is not a world we can go to if we please, or refuse to go to if we would rather not. And he explains actually the essence of life is the practice of love. And the core practice of love, or the most decisive love of the four loves, children's love, brothers and sisters' love, conjugal love or spouse's love, and parental love, the most decisive one is conjugal love. Because the quality of the love when men and women meet in love will determine if the love of God can come down on the earth and pass to the next generation. And out of love create life, and out of love and life create lineage. So he explains absolute sexual ethics, which is the highest expression of love of God and living for the sake of others, which lies at the core of creating the world that God envisaged. This is the highest practice, and it's central to practicing in your physical life what will prepare you for your spiritual life. It's practicing love, especially in the environment of family and of living for the sake of others. Okay, thanks a lot.